Nobody saw this coming, right? Ukraine is losing this war bigly. Donald Trump sat down and had a conversation with Putin, and this is what he had to say about his conversation. He said, I just had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the power of the dollar, and various other subjects. We both reflected on the great history of our nations and the fact that we fought so successfully together in World War II, remembering that Russia lost tens of millions of people and we likewise lost so many. I mean, that's right there. For one, for him to say, I sat down, I talked to Vladimir Putin, and it wasn't just, I sat down, I strong-armed Vladimir Putin about that war and told him that he better stop that war. No, instead he says, well, we talked about Ukraine. So this is like one out of a laundry list, and the Middle East and energy and artificial intelligence and the power of the dollar and various other subjects. Oh, and we reminisced about how our two countries worked together to defeat the Nazis in World War II, and they lost a lot of people. And we thank them for that kind of sacrifice that they did. I mean, we all lost a lot. So they're having this kind of like bro fest together, talking about all that. He says, we each talked about the strengths of our respective nations and the great benefit that we will someday have in working together. But first, as we both agreed, we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. So Putin's coming and Russia and Trump's going there. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately, and we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. Oh, kind of insulting. Got to be honest. Like, oh, we're going to have this conversation. Then we'll call President Zelensky, the guy that you're at war with, the guy that you're killing all of his people. We'll call him. We'll inform him of what we've decided without him. So we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I've asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, the Ambassador and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president, but it did happen, so it must end. No more lives should be lost. We want to thank President Putin for his time and effort with respect to this call and for the release yesterday of Mark Fogel, a wonderful man that I personally greeted last night at the White House. I believe this effort will lead to a successful conclusion, hopefully soon. Wow. Okay, so they're going to call Zelensky. They're going to inform them of their decision. He's saying that this war would not have happened. Very interesting. What's interesting about this is the fact that, Biden didn't pick up the phone to talk to Putin at all. They just pumped money into Ukraine, told Ukraine, we got your back. We totally have your back, knowing full well that Americans were not supportive of this war, that more than half the country was becoming unsupportive of the war. And yet they promised Ukraine the moon and NATO and being in the EU and being forever protected by us against Russia, their neighbor. And never once picked up the phone to talk to Putin. This was the first time Putin had heard from an American president since the last time I don't know if he ever talked to Biden at all during the time that he was president. Maybe once before the war. I'm not even sure. Here's Pete Hegseth talking about the deal with Ukraine, saying that, because Democrats had these demands. They said that the only way to end the war is for Russia to completely leave Ukraine, including leaving Crimea, which they grabbed in 2014. They got to get out of Crimea, so they have to completely go back to their pre-2014 borders, and they have to allow NATO in the country. There was just all of these crazy demands that were just absolutely not going to happen. And Pete Hegseth basically says, yeah, all of that was unrealistic. Ukraine's not going to be in NATO, and Ukraine's not getting its territory back.
We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops.
He's actually speaking to NATO. Pete Hegseth has been in Europe meeting with NATO leaders, and that is who he's talking about. He's telling NATO Ukraine can't be in NATO, and they're not going to return to those pre-2014 borders. You guys have lost your minds. Here's Trump essentially reiterating this, saying Biden started this war by promising Ukraine that they could be in NATO, and that was the foolish mistake that he made.
Yesterday were pretty accurate. I don't see any way that a country in Russia's position could allow them, just in their position, could allow them to join NATO. I don't see that happening. And long before President Putin, Russia was very strong on the fact that I believe that's the reason the war started, because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO, and he shouldn't have said that. As soon as he said that, I said, you know what? You're going to have a war now, and I was right about that. This is a war that would have never happened if I were president.
But you don't think it's President Biden's fault, not President Putin? I mean, he's the one.
I think Biden is incompetent, and I think when he said that they could join NATO, I thought that was a very stupid thing to say. I thought when he said, well, it depends if it's a minor incursion. In other words, it's okay if Russia does a minor incursion. I thought that was a very foolish thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a crisis. We didn't want nukes right on our border. Not even, I mean, there's at least a little bit of water in between Cuba and the United States, but this doesn't go over well. We would be freaking out if the Cuban Missile Crisis repeated itself. So obviously Russia started freaking out. What do you think that's going to do? It's going to trigger a war. Trump's not wrong. And Pete Hegseth said the same thing to NATO, and Trump is now saying it to the country. Zelensky, he issued out a bit of a statement about what was being talked about. This is in Ukrainian, so we're not going to play it. But he says, I had a long and detailed conversation with President Trump. I appreciate his genuine interest in our shared opportunities and how we can bring about real peace together. We discussed many aspects, diplomatic, military, and economic, and President Trump informed me about what Putin told him. We believe that America's strength, together with Ukraine and all our partners, is enough to push Russia to peace. So interesting, because some people were criticizing the fact that Hegseth and Trump said, yeah, no to Ukraine, no to NATO for Ukraine. They felt like they had taken the biggest bargaining chip off the table, that really they should have held on to that, gone to Putin and said, do what we want or else we're going to let them into NATO. And they came out point blank and said, no, they're not going to be in NATO. I think, though, that the others that are wanting to just strong arm Putin and say, look, we're going to keep NATO on the table as a bargaining chip are kind of missing the entire point of the war. They're missing the whole, they're just missing the whole point. You have to take that off the table to de-escalate the situation right away and say to Putin, all right, look, we will make sure Ukraine is never in NATO. That's your big problem. That's what's causing this war. So let's just take that off the table so that now we can have a conversation about ending the war. If that's off the table, do you need the war to continue? And if you do want to continue the war when that's off the table, why? So let's have a conversation and let's start negotiating why you think you want to continue the war, if you want to, now that we've taken the big beef off the table. And what Zelensky's alluding to is that the strength of America, as far as continuing to fund Ukraine, continuing to support them in fighting the war, would be the negotiating chip. We don't necessarily need to stick them in NATO, which we don't. I mean, look at what's happened. We've been promising Ukraine the moon without them being in NATO. What does it matter if they're in NATO or not? We're still giving them hundreds of billions of dollars. Pete Hegseth was asked, okay, then what does Russia have to give up? And this was his answer.
You have focused on what Ukraine is giving up. What concessions will Putin be asked to make?
Well, I would start by saying the arguments that have been made that somehow coming to the table right now is making concessions to Vladimir Putin outright that we otherwise, or that the president of the United States shouldn't otherwise make. I just reject that at its face. There's a reason why negotiations are happening right now, just a few weeks after President Trump was sworn in as President of the United States. Vladimir Putin responds to strength. In 2014, he invaded Crimea, not during the presidency of Donald Trump. Over 4 years, there was no Russian aggression from 2016 to 2020. In 2022, Vladimir Putin took aggression on Ukraine. Once again.
So in other words, what is Russia being asked to give up? Nothing. That's the answer. Couldn't answer that. The reality is, what can you ask Russia to give up? You could just tell them to give up the war. I mean, that's what you're asking them to give up the war. And the way you get them to give up the war is you say Ukraine won't be in NATO and you get to keep the territory, at least the pre-2022 borders. You're going to be able to keep at least the pre-2022 borders. Maybe what's on the table is the post-2022 borders, that, you know, the land that Russia has secured today. Maybe that's on the table for negotiation. But otherwise, Ukraine is going to have to give up a lot of stuff, because this was a war that was never winnable for Ukraine. It was never anything. This was just not something that could actually happen. Here's Trump talking about also what Zelensky is going to have to do in order to end the war.
Why did you decide to provide support to Ukraine? Would you support Zelensky ceding territory or exchanging territory in any agreement to end the war?
Well, he's going to have to do what he has to do, but, you know, his poll numbers aren't particularly great, to put it mildly. He's got a country where, you know, it's been savaged and attacked, and he's got an army that's been very, very brave, actually, despite the fact that, you know, we've given him, in my opinion, $350 billion. That's what the real number is. You don't hear that number. And Europe has given, in my opinion, $100 billion.
Wow, $350 billion is how much we've given them. Do you know we could solve the homelessness crisis in the United States with that money? It would have only taken, what would it have taken to solve the homelessness? I actually I researched this earlier today. Let me see if I can pull up the numbers. We have in this country right now 770,000 homeless people. In order to build brand new homes of about $200,000 per person, if we were to give them homes someplace, that would be $175 billion. And then that would be $154 billion to build homes for the 770,000 homeless people. Then we would need maybe another 20 billion annually for services, to, you know, funding support services for them. So yeah, in total, we gave Ukraine, the official number we'd been told before Trump saying 350 billion was 175 billion. That was already astronomical. And that right there would already have paid for all the homeless people in the United States at 154 billion. But he's actually saying we could have bought every homeless person in America. We could have built them 2 homes with the money that we gave to Ukraine. I mean, we've got a homelessness crisis. We have vets that served in these wars and they're living on the streets, and we won't give them a tiny home to live in, but instead we'll just dump money in Ukraine. I mean, our priorities are really off. So Trump wants his money back. He's a business guy. He's like, all right, we gave all this money to Ukraine. We want something now in return, because the previous administration was just giving the money away. And the whole reasoning for it was, we just have to stop Russia. Russia bad, Putin bad. That's the only reason. And Trump says, well, I want something back. We want some rare earth minerals. We want your oil and gas. So he's saying we're going to keep funding Ukraine. It won't stop, but we want something in return for that money.
So we're getting security on our money. We're going to have it secured by, they have rare earth, and they have oil and gas, and they have a lot of other things. And we're asking for security on our money.
So does it mean you are not sending any
They've
more
agreed to it. Ukraine has agreed to it.
Does it mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When will the U.S. stop sending funding? When will the U.S. stop sending funding?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back. And frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go.
Okay, so we'll go as long as we have to go, keep giving Ukraine money, but we're going to get something back. If we get those things back, can we then maybe solve the homelessness crisis? Can we just get the homeless people? Look, I know a lot of people don't want to do the gimmies, the handouts, but come on, we're doing the gimmies and the handouts to Israel and Ukraine and Egypt and all these other countries. Why don't we just solve the homelessness crisis and put them all in tiny homes, give them some social services to get them off the streets, take care of Americans? I'm all for that, because guess what? That improves my life. That improves your life. That's a gimme to me, rather than you giving it to Zelensky all of this time. What has been the reaction? The EU is, of course, frantically panicking. They were worried this day would come. Here it is. The Lithuanian president really, I think, spells it out. He says, this is the Lithuanian president, Gitanas Nausėda. He said, I just had a phone call with Zelensky. I assured that nothing changes. The aggressor remains an aggressor, and the victim, the country under attack, must be supported. And then he says, so he's saying, we're going to keep supporting you. So America might be out of there, but we're going to continue to support you. And this is what a lot of the European countries are saying. And then he says, a truce is not sustainable peace. It isn't? A truce is not sustainable peace. Then what is? Continued war? Continued war is sustainable peace? Oh, I see. Once you finally break up Russia, when you topple Moscow and you break up Russia into tiny little pieces, that's sustainable. That's the sustainable peace, apparently. But ending the war is not peace. War is peace. It says we must stop the aggressor now and forever. So yeah, topple Moscow. That's the plan. That's the grand plan. It says in Lithuania, we will continue supporting Ukraine, investing in its defense industry and providing all necessary weapons. Okay. Your money, your country, your part of the world even. Do what you want to do. I don't care. We need to get out of there. Here's another reaction. This is from, this person had gone viral as like a major Ukrainian supporter, Ilya Ponomarenko. Says, so we're supposed to give up our national territory, vow never to join NATO no matter what Russia does to us, and also give Donald Trump our rare earth metals. That's a very interesting deal from an aggressor and a partner that was to support our security in exchange for giving up our nuclear weapons, missile armaments, and strategic bomber fleet. Yeah, Ukraine lost this war. And a lot of us knew from the get-go that Ukraine would. A lot of us were wrong on the speed of which it would happen. I certainly thought that this would happen a lot faster, that Russia would go in, take a bunch of territory, and it would be over in just a matter of a couple of weeks or a couple of months at most. Continued on for a really long time. Ukrainians fought back. They did get a lot of money and weapons from the United States. They did a great job holding their own. You got to give it to them. They are fighters. But they lost in the end. A lot of people, a lot of lives were lost that were completely useless because a lot of us saw that this was going to end the way it's ending now. And now you've just sacrificed an entire generation of young people, which, by the way, the Ukrainian women who are left, right, the 20-year-old women, do you know who they're going to go marry? It's not Westerners. They're going to go to Russia and they're going to marry Russian guys. So now you've eradicated Ukrainians through also marriage and births. I mean, not only did you wipe out an entire generation of young men, but now the women are going to go find Russian men to go marry and mate with. And then Ukraine is going to be, once again, ethnically, culturally, religiously, linguistically Russian. And in a matter of 30, 40 years, they're going to just be joining Russia again because the people are like, what's the difference? We're Russian. John Mearsheimer, I've got to play this clip. This one went viral at the beginning of the war. We got to kind of circle back, remember it. This went viral, and now listen to it again. This was John Mearsheimer back in 2015.
But I actually think that what's going on here is that the West is leading Ukraine down the primrose path. And the end result is that Ukraine is going to get wrecked. And I believe that the policy that I'm advocating, which is neutralizing Ukraine and then building it up economically and getting it out of the competition between Russia on one side and NATO on the other side, is the best thing that could happen to the Ukrainians. What we're doing is encouraging the Ukrainians to play tough with the Russians. We're encouraging the Ukrainians to think that they will ultimately become part of the West because we will ultimately defeat Putin and we will ultimately get our way. Time is on our side. And of course, the Ukrainians are playing along with this. And the Ukrainians are almost completely unwilling to compromise with the Russians and instead want to pursue a hardline policy. Well, as I said to you before, if they do that, the end result is that their country is going to be wrecked. And what we're doing is, in effect, encouraging that outcome. I think it would make much more sense for us to work to create a neutral Ukraine. It would be in our interest to bury this crisis as quickly as possible. It certainly would be in Russia's interest to do so. And most importantly, it would be in Ukraine's interest to put an end to the crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago. Here we are 10 years later, millions of people potentially dead. And we're finally getting to that point, and Ukraine has been wrecked. John Mearsheimer was right. Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen show. This show in particular, we were not able to air much because it is a very controversial topic that would absolutely be censored here on YouTube. So if you want to watch the full show, which I highly recommend, go to KimIversonShow.com, because I couldn't even pick much of a clip to air here on YouTube because of the censorship issues. So get the full story, get the full information, go to KimIversonShow.com. That link is down below. It'll take you right to the full interview where you can learn about all of these alternative therapies and treatments for some of the deadliest ailments on earth. Once again, KimIversonShow.com. Thanks for watching.